Jeff, I can't believe I tricked you into coming onto this podcast. It makes me feel really good because you seem like a really smart guy, and but I bamboozled you. So thank you for coming on the show today.
You're very welcome. It's not hard to bamboozle me. It happens. My kids do it often. It happens quite often. For sure.
Oh, those kids. We better not. I better stay on topic, or I'm going to wander off. Hey, let me ask you this. When I met you, or when I got to sit down with you, really sit down with you, was maybe 2 years ago, 1.5 or 2 years ago. We were at an event, and I remember asking you about tell me about how you got involved in data centers, because I'm always fascinated by that story. And your story made me chuckle because of its unlikelihood on how you ended up where you ended up. Can you sort of, in a few moments, describe how you got in the data center business and how did you end up at Bloom Energy?
Yeah, absolutely. It was circuitous, to say the least. Now, I started life in college, beautiful Chico State. Everybody at Bloom, by the way, is all Ivy League, but I'm a Chico State boy.
You're the real worker. I got you.
Brought it to the public school system. I started life as a construction major at the time and a woodworker. So I made custom doors for new construction. Pretty front doors with side lights and all this. And that was my path, carpenter. Well, then the bottom fell out of the real estate market in beautiful Chico, California. So I'm sitting there going, how the hell am I going to pay for school? Like, I called my buddy Joe. I said, Joe, what am I going to do? He goes, well, you should come to work for the California State Lottery. I'm like, do they need doors? He said, no. But, you could be a mainframe operator. And I had a little computer savviness. So I said, first of all, those still exist? He said, yeah, it still exists. But we're moving to a DEC mini computer. We're going to be, really high tech. You could be a tape monkey. You can run around and do the backups. So I said, I'm in, kind of. I don't know if I want to move. He said, they'll pay for school. I said, I'm in. So worked graveyard shift for the next couple of years, the California State Lottery, working on DEC systems and concurrent systems and even a tandem system, if anybody's old enough to remember that stuff. Mm-hmm. But back then, as I think a 21-year-old, the operators also did the operations of the facility itself. So I was testing diesel gens and mechanical systems and, making sure that one of the first Cisco switches went in properly way back a very, very long time ago. From there, went to work for Hewlett Packard on the much more technical side, the server side, the semiconductor side, and spent 12 years at EMC. So I got to help and look at and work with the acquisition of VMware and Documenta and many of those technologies. But that's when I really, really dug into HPC, high performance compute, high performance storage, data replication, what we call availability zones now, synchronous data replication, adaptive, all of that. So great education there. From there, did quite a bit of consulting still on storage technologies, but then someone came to me and said, well, can you be a consultant for us just to market our future data center? Went to work for Prime at that point and as a consultant, and then moved into a partnership role there where we were building them and leasing them and talking to the tenants. So from there, Bloom had been talking to me, trying to set up a data center vertical, looking for someone who kind of understood the market. And the rest is history, as they say. So I used to run them. I used to sell equipment into them, right? And then I was building them. And now I'm back to selling equipment back into them. Yeah.
As you're telling that story, in my mind, I'm popping into those little mini eras. The DEC Alpha was so disruptive in the business, the mini frame, not just the mainframe, the minis and the DEC Alphas coming along. And, for the nerds out there, it's blowing their minds. Most people that had nothing to do, that only knew computers through personal computers wouldn't know what we're talking about. But these things were so disruptive. And then to go to EMC, the idea of attached storage, and then the acquisition of VMware, which was virtualization. Like, these are big disruption eras of potential. And then to go from there to availability zones. Again, disruption on how, famously founded by AWS and how they wanted to do cloud, but just this idea of coming into a metropolitan area and how we could make these connections. And so if you think about your career, starting with doors at the beautiful Chico State, my grandparents retired to Paradise, California, from Santa Clara. They're both gone now, but family all over that part of the world. But it's disruption. And now here we are in the data center world. You'd think in data center world, we got disruptions all over the place, but none of it, no disruption can take place if we don't have power. Right? We got to have access to this infrastructure. We got to have access to power. And oh, by the way, the constraints are, it's got to be sustainable. It's got to meet, the community goals. It's got to be affordable. It's got to be safe. All these other things. And so, I guess what I want to know is when you start putting your resume together, go do something else. Could you let me know so I know what disruption is about to happen?
It was very valuable, David. It was very valuable experience seeing all of that, especially virtualization, right? The disaggregation and then shared infrastructure. And it has helped me so much in my current role because if someone says to me, for instance, they have a machine learning data center. Well, I immediately think that's not latency sensitive. It's non-transactional. Probably may not even need to be N+1. So yeah, it was very valuable in this role.
One of the cool things that helps people like you, I think, Jeff, is those disruptions force the people in them, at least in order to survive, to think about, they have to think about communication amongst the teams differently. So for example, I remember in particular in the sort of that era of EMC, VMware, before and after, early days, the compute people, the CPU people, the compute people, computer people, the hardware people really didn't have to talk to the network people that much, and they really didn't have to talk to the storage people. Yeah. But when all of this hit, and then on to the various platforms that they built to because companies even like QTS, we built our own private cloud off of that infrastructure. Cisco, VMware, EMC, putting these pods together, doing all these other things.
The BCE product.
That's exactly right. And so we had to learn, our teams had to develop the art of communicating, because if any of these are out of balance, you'll be crushing the compute, but you'll blow up your storage. If you blow up your storage and or you could be, you could get storage and compute figured out, but you blow up your network. Like all of this has to work in tandem. So they have to learn how to talk to each other, to communicate. And so it's, in addition to the hardware and the connections and this rich history that we have, one of the things that I love the most going through many of those things myself is just learning how to have conversations with other introverts in the building to figure out how we're going to solve a problem. And then solve the problem so that we can go help our customers. Like that's worth its weight in gold.
What you're describing there, which was the reason I believe for the VMware acquisition and the real value of VNC back then, was one word: interoperability.
That's right.
They would publish the interoperability with the Brocade fiber switch versus others and the Cisco switch. And what does VMware do? It virtualizes a compute environment, which solves the interoperability problem. I can make this NIC card or this fiber port look a specific way in the virtual world. It was much more than just increasing the utilization of the chip.
Right.
It led to interoperability, and that was the real value. All of these separate pieces of hardware can interoperate at a hypervisor level. Right. So you're getting back into the nerd days for me here, David.
Well, let's not stretch our brains too much on that. Let's come up to today. I love the space that you're in. There are very few conversations that are maybe 2 or 3 topics that are as important as this. I regularly say, my poor guests are tired of me saying it, a data center is only a data center if it has 3 things. It has to be always on, has to have a reliable, safe, affordable power, has to be always available, meaning it's got to be connected to whatever it's connecting to, whether that's latency sensitive or not latency sensitive. It has to be secure. Logically and physically, it has to be secure. If it's not those 3 things, you don't want to trust your data in there. You don't want to put your data in there. It's something other than a data center. And so as we're looking at the period of time that we're in now over the last few years, one of the things that's risen to the top of all of these conversations in order to deliver those three things, one of the hardest, if not the hardest thing, is to get access to infrastructure or access to power. And then with power, whatever the data center needs are, our community requirements are, the availability of utility, et cetera. And so it's a regular conversation on this show. I know you speak about it regularly. A number of people have come on the program and talked about why we're here now, not what the solutions are, but why we're here right now. Why do you think we are where we are, where everybody's talking about energy and power, not just for data centers, any critical infrastructure, reshoring manufacturing, any critical growth? Why do you think we're having that conversation right now?
Yeah, that's quite the small topic there, David. As you said, yeah, power is an important part of the data center process, right? We actually craft our leases based on price per kilowatt versus square footage. It's what we do. It's a confluence of things that all happen to be occurring at the same time, right? We are first and foremost taking dirty generation offline, right? As well as we go greener. More important than even generation, we have an aging transmission infrastructure that's simply not been invested in properly. We need thousands of miles of transmission to meet the projected demands. And I think that we've built tens of miles versus that 1,000 in the last year. So getting the power to the site. See, I said data, I slipped back in my EMC days there. Getting the power to the site is incredibly important, but it's more difficult than ever with entitlements and right-of-ways and just the pure construction and lead times. At the same time, you have, of course, the machine learning AI revolution, quote unquote, or growth in that sector, very power-hungry compute. But you also, people forget, we're still in the early days of cloud, right? 70% plus of the data in the enterprise is still in the enterprise facility. It's not migrated to cloud yet. So you have compounding growth rates in cloud expansion. You have MLAI coming online. You have transmission constraints and generation constraints. And so all of those things are coming together to form this problem. It's a confluence of things that are creating this problem today. And I think, quite frankly, the data center industry and many utilities got caught flat-footed with these power-hungry GPUs, right? With the advent of this type of technology was somewhat obscure in my son's gaming computer or in a Bitcoin miner, right? That's really all it was used for. But then the value was seen, and that's just not enough time to upgrade the infrastructure between then and now, the infrastructure that took generations to build, right? Literally. So centralized utility, I don't believe is going to be able to meet this demand. We have to go to microgrids or on-site sources of power. And you mentioned earlier, a little bit off topic, but you mentioned earlier security. Well, a centralized grid is potentially an insecure source of power, not only with weather, but cyber attacks as well. We know that, right? So, on-site power that you have control of, amongst other things, will probably be a very large part of the solution.
I want to come back to centralized grid in a little bit because that's a provocative question or idea. I want to talk about it. But before we do that, so I got to talk to Christine King. She's a director of the GAIN program at Idaho National Lab. And one of the things she spent a lot of time talking about was the challenge with transmission. And why she talked about that, a regular conversation is the generation topic. Whatever your generation source is, I know we'll get to some of those conversations in a little bit. But she said at least at that time that we had that conversation, which was a couple of years ago, and we're actually about to have another conversation here in a few weeks, is people weren't talking enough about transmission and distribution.
That's right.
It is such a challenge. It is in some places, in some ways, a greater challenge than generation. And There are a number of ways to tackle it. So anyway, I agree. But all of these things, whatever their sources, have led to this a conversation that I don't think anybody imagined 3 years ago.
No.
Certainly not before that, about on-site generation or near-site generation or microgrid. And we're familiar in data centers with microgrids because we built out UPS infrastructure, and those are a type of microgrid. Our listeners, if they have a laptop, they've got a microgrid. So microgrid. When you talk about microgrids, how do you think about it? And then maybe we'll go from there into some of the ideas that extend from that. So when you're thinking about a microgrid or self-generation, what does that mean to you if you're having a conversation with somebody?
To me, it really means, on-site power owned by you or a financier that you are in control of the demand, the draw. It means, none of the traditional utility overhead being as far as transmission lines, substations, things like that. You're right. A UPS system is a form of microgrid, but so to kind of compare and contrast that, microgrids are obviously outside the building generating tens of megawatts or hundreds of megawatts of power, either in conjunction with the utility or independent from the utility. But it's just a form of on-site power that, and this is important to me with as far as Bloom is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
My electrons are no different, as an example, than the electrons from the utility. That's first and foremost, right? Inside the building does not change, so there's no impact to that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it is, at its core, on-site power generation, not reliant upon transmission and substations.
Yeah,
that's really it.
One of the things that comes up when we're starting to, we've had a number of these conversations with a number of people, is who do you think, would that live on the data center's site? And before you answer that, here's where I'm coming from. I'm thinking out loud. We've moved from small campuses. So not all data centers have the same mission. Some data centers
Correct.
are, small. I don't want to label them as edge or regional. They're just smaller. And so if we're talking in terms of power, 25, 30 megawatts or smaller, that's about a 300,000 or 400,000 square foot building, something like that.
Which is crazy for edge, right? Quote unquote.
Yeah. Quote unquote. Tony, our good friend Tony Grayson, would say modular, whatever it is, whatever that size looks like, it's really to a mission, right? It's got to be on, it's got to be available, it's got to be secure. And so that could be in a small modular container that he talks about regularly and champions. It could be in a mega data centers like ours, which are hundreds of megawatts, usually and more being deployed on campuses of buildings. And so they could easily get to many hundreds, if not, into the gigawatt plus range, for a variety of reasons, the customers that we're serving and how we're serving it. So you've got a wide range of deployment there. So for data centers like ours, data center companies and operators like ours, or the big hyperscales, if they own them themselves, it's moving it really into urban planning. You've gone from this building that's all that's ever going to live in that area to multiple buildings that have to be interconnected to themselves. There's things that they have to do for the community. It's not have to, want to. And so you've got this urban planning element. And now to do on-site generation feels like it's another complexity to that. And one of the things us engineers, and I know you know this from your former days, if we can, we try to engineer complexity out of our solution. So how do you see it playing out? Do you think it's likely that a data center operator like ours will want to take that on with the benefit of it, but also the regulation of it? Because it's a different order of magnitude, as I understand, of regulation. Or do you think would we partner with other data centers? Would we have somebody that's their business? They bring a local generation product and they set it there and they own and operate it, and you have contracts with them, not dissimilar that like you do with a public utility. What do you think is the most likely as it develops at the scale and speed that we're moving at now?
That's a big question. I would say all of the above will be deployed in some form or another.
Okay.
But So I would hit on your regulation point. If the generation source, such as Bloom's, is non-combustion, the regulation is incredibly easy, much more simplified. You're not putting any pollutants into the air, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you are building. If you choose to do this yourself, you are building a power plant essentially, especially if we're talking about hundreds of megawatts of power.
Mm-hmm.
Now, following up on the last thing you said, which will there be a service that looks like utility? I believe the utilities will be deploying Bloom. In fact, you see some announcements from Silicon Valley Power recently in conjunction with Bloom. There will most likely be others in the near future where utilities are realizing, well, we really want to retain these customers. We truly cannot transmit the power in time.
Mm-hmm.
Let's work with Bloom, whether that lands on site or near site. There's lots of those conversations happening, right now,
Mm-hmm.
where Bloom is bridging the gap between utility or remains there permanently, but the utility is still involved. That makes it look easier. It's more comfortable for the data center world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bloom is not necessarily metered power at the PDU, like we're used to writing the leases, right? But it can be done certainly. I'm seeing demand for all of those things. Some of the hyperscalers are very comfortable signing a financial agreement and a power purchase agreement and deploying on site and architecting around that. They find it's not as difficult as they think.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's going to be a combination of all of them. It's the appetite of the developer or the tenant.
Mm.
In the case of CoreWeave in Illinois, Bloom is contracted, directly with CoreWeave, but the developer is Carissa, right? So we're flexible with that. It doesn't matter to us.
When we QTS first began really developing brownfield data centers. So before we got into the design build part, we were in the operate maintain part. We were co-location.
Yeah.
My listeners have heard a million times what co-location is and the difference between co-located data center from a enterprise or hyperscale data center is, at least as it looks like today. But as we got into bigger and bigger data centers to serve not just co-location customers, but big enterprise, we mean Fortune 1000, or the hyperscaler, which we mean those top 8 or 10 e-commerce, cloud, whatever companies that are really have significant workloads. Like they transcend all the rest.
Yeah. Managed service providers. Yeah.
Exactly right. And so when we began then saying, look, when we consider a property, not only is its size and fiber connectivity, but we wanted substations on our property or adjacent to our property, like literally like that we could fence in, even if we have to give the key to the power company or they have the key and they give it to us, whatever it is. But we want those transformers sitting there. We want the high voltage coming into medium volt. Like we didn't mind the complication of that. We didn't mind the, because we want, where we started sort of this earlier, the control. We want to make sure that I've got multiple feeds coming in. I've got control over how it's maintained. Or at least some part of control. And so that's very common at pretty much every site that we operated and that we design build. Like it's part of it. What we're talking about now with self-generate or microgrid and self-generating power potentially it's the same idea, but it's orders of magnitude more in investment, in connectivity. Do you see an opportunity just from your seat, whether it's just as an industry person, maybe not Bloom specifically, but Jeff, the industry guy, where you could see a utility provider coming to a specialist like your organization and then talking to 2 or 3, maybe it's an operator like a QTS or one of our frenemies. Maybe it's one of these big hyperscaler owners or whatever. And 2 or 3 of us come in. I don't want to say joint venture, but we invest in, we buy into the design, we buy into the big idea, we see the capacity there, and we help fund so that whoever it is can get that thing into a central location that if there is transmission, it's very short distance. It's not miles and counties and state lines or whatever. Like it's this thing to accelerate the deployment, to what am I trying to say? Reduce the risk. But that's a level of cooperation. We've cooperated like that before to get legislation taken care of or whatever. But usually for an investment like this, that's not that common. Do you see an opportunity for that? Or do you still think, nah, not really? Like these guys are going to build their microgrid over here. This other group's going to build their microgrid over there. And they might be really close together instead of coming together to make it happen.
Yeah, great question. Yes, I absolutely see that as a possibility.
Okay.
Actively being worked on, today. I think something more likely it'll be in the middle, David. It will be a utility type entity or utility themselves organizing data centers and offering, perhaps, Bloom as a service or on-site power as a service in order to bridge that gap and retain that data center there. A lot of people forget that. Why would they want to do that? Well, we build an expensive building. Let's say it's 700 million. We put a bunch of good looking stuff in it, a bunch of protections and distribution and blah, blah, blah. And that's an absolute rounding error compared to the IT equipment going in that building.
That's right.
It will be billions of dollars and refreshed usually every 4 years.
Right.
Well, if you have sales tax in that community, that's a great source of sales tax revenue. So they'll want to be retained. So I do see the market coalescing into something more organized where there is a utility or a third party that it's a fairly simple process today, but it makes it seem even more simple. They can sign up with a warm and friendly that they already know. And the equipment is perhaps owned by the utilities in the case of SVP or some other entity to make it easier. So yeah, I do see that happening. What I find when I educate prospects and customers, it is much more simple than they're thinking, right? And that really has to do with the reliability, right? We're 4 nines and an 8 out of the box. If you want more 9s than that, it's not making a 2N environment. You're adding a very small percentage, like 10% more Bloom boxes. And one of the unique things about Bloom is we actually contract for that with you, that availability, right? So yeah, they will be coming together. I don't know about centralized with transmission. I think you qualified it well. Maybe centralized with a very short transmission, to the data center. But yeah, I do see the market coming together with several big energy players deploying on-site power, whether that's Bloom or someone else, right? This has been done for solar and wind.
Yeah.
Bloom is just always on base load power.
Right.
We're not in.
By the way, I don't know if you know this, but you just dated yourself. 4 nines and an 8. That sounds like a punk rock band from 1982. I can see you in your vans and getting a little out of control up there in Chico. I'm gonna have to go look at some cops footage and see if we can checkered vans. When I was a kid in Southern California, they actually had a Vans factory, like in Burbank or something. About 45 minutes away, and you could. I didn't go to it, but you could go and literally just tell them what color, how you wanted them to put your shoe together. It wasn't particularly I don't even know that it was more expensive, $2 more or something like that. So for $28, you get your, crazy, unique to you, supposedly, vans back in the day. Anyway, yeah, 4 nines and an 8. I wrote it down. I'm going to have to think of, I'm going to ask ChatGPT what your stage name would be.
I like it.
Mine from 1982 was Claudette Spiderbarf. That's what I thought my stage name should be. I couldn't sing, so I was perfect for punk rock. But
I love it.
I want to pivot for a second. We're going to work through some of the energy sources, but overwhelmingly, and I'm not trying to pick on any particular energy or support any particular energy generation possibility, but the most common that I hear for today is natural gas. It's far and away the most common that I hear talked about. And then they usually use this phrase bridging. It's a bridging to something. It's a bridge to nuclear. It's a bridge to maybe hydrogen. I don't know. It's a bridge is regularly how it's described. but it's the most common that I hear for base load data center power. That might be wrong. I might not be listening to all the conversations, but that's what I hear. So when you think of when you hear, first of all, what is bridging? What do you think we mean by that? And then let's come back and talk about natural gas for a second. What is bridging technology to you?
Obviously it's, as the name implies, it's a bridge to the final solution or a better solution. Bridges vary in length, right? You get some
Sure.
bridges are very long, some are very
Yeah.
short. So it typically implies that there's something on the horizon, right? Whether that's small modular reactors or whether that's distributable green hydrogen, which you probably heard me refer to that's the unicorn flying over the rainbow, pooping out Skittles. It's just very, very difficult to transport and distribute.
Right.
Natural gas is 9 nines of availability in the US. I like to say that at some point the earth is a single point of failure. So 9 nines is pretty good.
Right.
It's highly redundant. It's affordable. So yeah, absolutely. I think that's the solution. Considering that, things like SMRs are a ways out, whether you think it's 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. I personally think hydrogen distribution, especially green hydrogen, is at least that far. And again, no one wants that more than Bloom.
Right.
Bloom is a hydrogen fuel cell today. We just cracked that hydrogen out of the CH4, out of the methane,
Right.
right? So no one wants it more than Bloom. But we have to be pragmatic, as you probably heard me say before on panels. We can cut emissions right now. We can cut 100% of the pollutants. And by the way, when you combust hydrogen, you create a massive amount of NOx, much more than we're doing today. So it's not the perfect solution. It is for Bloom, of course. So, long answer for you, David, but bridging to me implies that the market seems to think there's something else out there. While we wait around for that magical flux capacitor, whatever it may be,
Right.
we should begin deploying natural gas solutions much more broadly and much more quickly.
I've said it many times. Like, we've got an idea, or at least in our imagination, what paradise looks like, but we got to eat on the way to paradise.
Yeah.
And so how do we do that? When you have this conversation around natural gas, before you answer it, I want to give you two quick things. But I'm curious, my question's going to be, when we talk about the kind of power that we're talking about, and then we talk about natural gas, for people not close to our industry, their eyebrows go up at a minimum. They're like, whoa, are we creating a bigger problem? Two quick things here. I had Professor Donald Sadoway from MIT on a few years ago. We were talking about energy storage, and he had hosted a TED Talk. He had a TED Talk where he talked about energy storage as it related to intermittent power. And he said, there is, for grid level energy, until we have grid level energy storage, this just isn't an opportunity to serve what we call base load, that steady state heavy load. And he is 100% into the potential of green power. He's not anti-green power. He's not, he's on the record. He's in private. Like, he's 100% for it. But he's very pragmatic and purpose fit. Let's not do more harm than good trying to make something fit that doesn't fit. And when he talked about energy storage, he said it's got to be safe. It's got to be locally sourced. Doesn't do us any good to try to get some material, not just from the next neighborhood, but from another continent, is absolutely crazy. And so if you can do that, and it's got to be affordable. So it's got to be safe, locally sourced. It's got to be available, create enough energy storage without messing up the environment that we're trying to help, so that you can do these sustainability things, or this intermittent power. And so he's all about tapping into, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, he's talked about this many times in a number of forums, pursuing the technologies that are available to us today as clean as we can, and taking advantage of that. And let's try to keep our minds open. But he acknowledges it's a difficult conversation because you got to educate people, and it can sound very technical. So I'm curious how you help solve that. But when you mention bridge, it reminds me of the conversation I heard once where this man was talking to God, and God said to him, ask me something hard. I'll do it for you. And the guy said, all right, build me a bridge from LA to Honolulu. He said, come on, something hard, serious. And he said, all right, Lord, help me to understand my wife. And God said, do you want 2 lanes or 4 lanes on your bridge?
Yeah.
And I've been married almost 40 years, and I completely resonate with that
Yeah.
perspective. Might be too hard for the Lord. So how do you have that conversation with people that, yes, we want access to power. Yes, we want these things. Let's say we're all in agreement, but it feels like we're defeating our sustainability challenges by using a fuel like this. You've had to have many of these conversations. How would you address that?
Yeah. Another tough question. Like I used to tell my kids when they said, Dad, I want this video game or I want that. I would say, I want to be 6'4", but I'm not. Right. So, um,
Well, not
it,
with that attitude. Come on, Jeff. You could.
on the, on the intermittent topic is, I think you'll agree with me, David. I personally never seen a quote unquote real data center running completely on intermittent power. Right. If we look to Ireland a couple of years ago, they had a month with no wind. Right. So, I mean, that does happen. When you start talking energy storage, for potentially days or weeks, you're talking massive, expensive, and potentially dangerous facilities. Then you start thinking about fire codes and permitting and how do you build that? Right. So, back to the pragmatic comment, in the case of on-site fuel cells, we're not combusting anything. That's point number one. So no NOx or SOx. And, as a function of using natural gas, of course, we have a very pure stream of CO2 and water vapor. This is high school chemistry. Those are our byproducts. The fact we have to look at the fact that data centers, as you know, have to be on 24/7, 365. The intermittents don't work. Natural gas is absolutely the best way to get there today, while cutting all of the pollutants and still producing less CO2 than a typical U.S. utility. If you tell me, look, I'm in Hillsboro, Oregon. Okay, you're all hydro. No emissions there. I get it.
Right.
I get it. But this is something that Bloom has been doing for well over a decade that can be done today to improve the sustainability scorecard while providing adequate power, tens or hundreds of megawatts, whatever the facility needs, with much better reliability than they're accustomed to today, which leads to things like firing gens much less often. Right. So there's a lot of goodness there. I mean, usually the conversation revolves around, look, we all want a magical power source, a Mr. Fusion, to quote Back to the Future again, that I could just hook up to my car, or hook up to my data center and use a banana peel. But we just don't have that today. And, natural gas is responsible for cutting 50% of the emissions over the last decade plus, right? It's a much cleaner source. Is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. Right. But until we get there, whether that's hydrogen or SMRs or something else, it's the best we have today, right? That can actually meet the needs of a data center.
I've heard many people, when they talk about, this is not shilling for natural gas, but like, look, we're flaring it off in parts of the country. And it's not that it's not, that there aren't some places and some workloads, as I described a data center before, on, available, and secure. I'm imagining what we call base load, inference, these things that are, your sheriff's 911 system, they don't fail elegantly. They've got to be, to the degree that we can harden them and make them available for the hospital, for whatever, your kid's education. They have to be on. Those critical environments have to be on. Is there a possibility? I'm not anti any and I know you're not saying this either. I'm not anti any intermittent power. I don't, whatever, if it fits the workload, and if we can do it in affordable, sustainable, like the total cost of ownership makes sense. The recycling makes sense. The space it requires makes sense. And I don't mean that like it doesn't make sense. Purpose fit. Let's do it. What I don't want to do is continue a conversation where we just choose whatever our favorite topic is of the day, and we don't investigate the others pragmatically on what can we do? How can we solve the problem today? We don't want to leave our borders if we don't have to. We want to have sovereignty over there are a few things we we think are super important. We've got to hear many conversations by people in the federal government, state and local government, private industry, to be able to, certainly within our continent, if not within our borders, to be able to do some of the most important foundational things for your economic survival should get our attention. And so let's pursue all of those things wherever they are. And if you've got a workload that can go down for a week inelegantly, and it's okay. Like, I've got infrastructure in my data center that if we have a utility outage, they can they're not on UPS, they're on gens, and so they just fail. And they're built to do this, like turn off your lamp. They can go down.
Yeah.
But the IT load is not, those sensitive things we were talking about in the beginning of this thing, they do not go down elegantly. I used to fall elegantly, but at my age and weight now, I do not fall elegantly. It's traumatic for everybody. It does. So anyway, I get, so we come back to these things that are readily available. But I think that one of the things, you're very good at this conversation. I've heard you many times. But I think those of us in the industry also, I'm good at talking about data, and I'm good about talking about the data center proper. But I'm trying to get more informed about these things that serve the data center, because I'm in the community now, and I want to be able to accurately and elegantly answer their concerns, their legitimate concerns, but maybe they don't have all of the information, not just on the value of data center infrastructure, but why we want to connect them. And if we all agree that that's correct, these are the things that are available to us to keep it safe, affordable, and available. And these are some of the things, and you're in that industry.
Yeah, no, it's again, that's a very, very big topic. You begin to look at things like pollutants and noise associated with combustion, for instance. And I think, part of the answer, I really like what you said there, that if it makes sense, for the facility or for the workload, if we come full circle of what we were discussing earlier with high performance compute, we apply that to machine learning. There are certainly workloads that can go down inelegantly. They have checkpoints, right? You rerun the batch, to use an old term. You rerun the job. You go back 10 minutes if you drop. So we may see, non-N+1, non-tier 3 facilities for these types of workloads. And it can be a combination of those things, right? I mean, Bloom has integrators that can integrate wind and solar. But for a data center in the middle of Santa Clara, where I'm sitting right now, land is expensive. I can't deploy 100 acres of solar, right? In order to meet needs, right? At $6 million an acre or whatever it is now. So it's going to be a combination of things for regular facilities, for data centers, especially transactional data centers. You mentioned 911, but what about banking, the stock market, large companies using SAP or Oracle? You can't have your paycheck or a stock purchase or a large movement of money just disappear,
right? Just
evaporate, right? So they have to always be on, and that's what Bloom is intended to do. We're not a backup generator. We're not a battery. We are always on base load power electrochemically. So we think we're a very good fit for this bridge, or this time between transmission gets fixed or the next thing comes along. Mostly because we've been around so long, right? There's approximately 20,000 of these units deployed in the field. We know it works. We write 1 billion data points a day of telemetry from all of those units. So predictive analysis, that's why we're confident about our uptime. But like you said, I think it's going to be a combination of things that are fit for the purpose. And if the purpose is you need tens or hundreds of megawatts of constant base load power, and the grid can't provide it, you have to look at what's available today.
Yeah.
You have to move at the pace of business, right? There's a real ROI for a tenant, whether that's Microsoft or AWS or Oracle, for a tenant coming to market in 18 months versus 10 years, when utility is projecting that they'll be there. If utility is there and you need additional power, that's fine. We connect with utilities every day to supplement the power to the building. That's simple for Bloom.
I think you just gave me something super valuable to take home to my wife and let her know a paycheck isn't supposed to just disappear.
Yeah.
have this conversation. I'll let you know how it goes. She's half Japanese and half Irish, so I may not survive the conversation.
Good luck.
Yeah, good. Thank you. We might have to do some prayers after this. One of the darlings, it's fascinating to me. I have no experience with it, few conversations, is we are fascinated with three initials, SMR, small modular reactor.
Mhm.
And I think the potential is incredible. Small modular reactors are deployed in the U.S. Navy at pretty much every single ship out there. But when they talk about SMRs to supply critical infrastructure, they don't. The idea is similar to what's deployed in a military fashion, but the technology is not. But there's a range of, depending upon who you are, if that's your industry, if you're a proponent of it, if you're in the design space, I hear conversations that this technology is going to be available very quickly,
Yeah.
5 or 6, 7 years. They seem to be in the minority.
Good.
And then I have other people in the side of the spectrum. None of them are in that industry. They might be in energy like you or others. And so let's say that first group is 25% of the conversation. Another 30% of the conversation is, no disrespect intended. I'm not saying this to be disagreeable, but I really think we're at least 10, but probably more like 12 to 15 years, really in what we're talking about. They're rolling through the factory assembly line. They're being deployed like Legos. They're safe, they're regulated. It's a design or two that has been approved at multiple sizes. They can be interconnected and like the realization once you get through experimentation and whatever. And then the vast majority of people, 50%, whatever, I didn't do the math, 45, 50%, somewhere between that 7 and 12 to 15 year range. Without pinning you down to a time, because I don't know that we know, how do you look at not so much the potential, because we've talked about that, but the practical application, especially when you think about something we haven't really talked about yet, the difficulty of deploying one of these microgrids, whether it's natural gas or any kind, we've got to go deploy it. There's safety, there's regulation. It's not just the finance. When you think about that as it relates to SMR or really any of these things, how do you react to that? How do you think about it personally, not just as a proponent of the particular type of natural gas or the things that you do, but just in general? You've been around this for a long time. You've been in these conversations a long time, and then maybe we can talk about the safety and deployment angle.
Yeah. Well, I agree with everything you said there. I think that there will be some very small number of deployments in appropriate geographies in the next 5 to 10 years. The technology is safe, but I think there will be. I think Data Center Frontiers Summit a couple of months ago, I said, on a panel, power to the people, meaning when you say you're going to deploy a nuclear reactor in a highly populated area, whether or not you've done all the homework and you've gone through the testing and you could prove it's safe on paper, how will everyone respond to that?
Right.
Entitlements and the vote. So I do think I agree with you. I think we're 10 to 15 years out on that. I think SMRs will have a role in that time. They're not as, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. There's massive setbacks. They want a consistent workload. They don't like oscillating, fluctuating workloads. So there's some limitations there. But at the same time, and this is purely my opinion, not Bloom's opinion that I know of, don't forget that when you feed the Bloom electrolyzer product a heat source, like from nuclear, we are the most efficient electrolyzer on the planet. So today,
What's an electrolyzer?
We're making hydrogen. Today, we take molecules and we give you electrons.
Mm.
We can reverse that process. You give me electrons and a heat source, and I'll give you the most efficient hydrogen on the planet.
Mm.
So I think there's a play to coordinate there, certainly. And again, that's Jeff's opinion. That's not been stated by Bloom.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a play where we all play together nicely, but I think it will be highly geographic depending on the geography, how far are you from people, what areas are open to it. I don't think it will be the panacea that we're all looking for. I think that, natural gas power will be here for quite a long time, decades will be what will be the solution. And again, back to the pragmatic comment. Can you get through all of that regulation, legislation, impact to the community, all of those things? Can you get through all of that in the next 5 years? I don't think so.
Right.
Don't think so.
Yeah, I think it'll be we know it's going to be a spectacular challenge, but intermittent aside, and the space requirement for solar and wind, regulation, you say nuclear deploy anywhere, even if you're a proponent of it, you pause. When you come back to, for example, natural gas, what's the reaction when you say, look, I want to build a microgrid. I want it to be whatever the size it is. I want it to be incrementally growable. It's going to look like this. It could either be built to serve this critical infrastructure customer, or it could do that. And if a grid provider wants to do this, for example, and they basically white label you or contract somebody like you to come in and do that to serve the other needs of the community, not just data centers, for example. Does anybody really think about that? Think about pushing back on how that would get deployed, what the safety of that looks like, what the complexity of that looks like, or are they already conditioned? We already do this now. Like utility comes in and builds this infrastructure now. We're used to how this goes, and in fact, we're not particularly resistant if you're not running a bunch of transmission lines through me. It's just connecting to those things nearby.
Yeah, that's exactly, you hit it on the head. It's the latter. Bloom does this every day. Two things are important to remember. Well, I guess there's three things. I'll make a comment. When I was doing site selection, I would avoid natural gas lines around my data center, right? But now the market is much, much more open to it. You have to look at the efficiency of Bloom, right? So a fuel cell will begin its life at, say, 62% efficiency, and around 54% efficiency, we will replace the guts of that fuel cell, the cells themselves. So 60% of those molecules are turning into electrons. If you look at combustion, it's typically in the 30s versus burning. Also, if we look at the impact of the gas network, remember, we're not combusting, so we're very low pressure. We're at 14 psi. We don't require high pressure gas. So typically, we were just tapping into the existing distribution network for natural gas. It's not a huge deal if it's somewhat nearby to get that application in and get fuel to the site if it's not already there, right? So we can do tens of megawatts, or at least 10 megawatts up of a standard kind of city pressure 4-inch line. We're not talking about, brand new 30-inch mains that we have to tap into. So that's a huge advantage for Bloom, the efficiency and the low pressure nature of it, and the no combustion again.
Right. Maybe to help us to understand, Bloom deploy. So we're talking about natural gas, and we've had a number of people on here with a variety of products that also tap into natural gas as the source to ultimately get to generate electrons. What's the difference between what Bloom does? You've talked about fuel cells many times, and we don't need to name any of the other folks, but somebody else, a traditional, different organization that may have turbines or do something different than what is it, your technology, and what's the difference? I don't want to make an infomercial for Bloom, but I'm very curious, and I'm sure the audience would as well. What's the difference, and what's the technology you use?
No, that's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day, Bloom is after the hydrogen molecule.
Okay.
Right. And that can be in biogas, that can be pure hydrogen, or that could be from methane, natural gas, CH4. So that's the most distributable, the most affordable, the most reliable network out there. So let's assume we're talking about natural gas coming into a Bloom system. The process we use is electrochemical. So just to differentiate, we're not turning a turbine or something to make electricity. We are taking that hydrogen. When that hydrogen comes into contact with oxygen, just from the ambient atmosphere. Hopefully there's oxygen in the ambient air, or I don't
We
care
don't
anymore.
we don't care anymore.
You don't care anymore at that point, right? So that oxygen molecule goes across the cathode up to the anode, and it reacts with that hydrogen molecule naturally. That produces electrons. It also produces water vapor, right? Because I started with CH4. We simply capture those electrons inside the box. Each box is putting out 65 kilowatts in an electrochemical manner, in a oxidation is a better way to say it. So there's nothing moving in my box. We're not rotating anything. This is electrochemical. Now, how do we get that hydrogen? That electrochemical process is naturally exothermic. So it gets up to 860 C inside a very well insulated box. We're creating water vapor. We use the water we create, which instantly turns into steam. We reform that CH4 into its components. We're interested in the hydrogen component, right? And that's what we use today. So we take existing infrastructure in the form of natural gas. We use steam reformation inside the box to produce that hydrogen molecule. And then we combine it with oxygen and we make electrons. If I'm using hydrogen today, my only byproduct is water vapor, right? So the very pure form of CO2 that we do release, it's very dense. It's very pure. Like I said, it can be easily captured. If customers doing that today, we can capture 100% of that CO2 right off the box if you have a place to put it or to use it in industry, right? So that's always an option with Bloom. You can also capture that heat that I just referred to. You can use it in absorption chillers or district heating as an example. Longer answer than maybe you were looking for, but yeah, essentially using natural gas as the form of hydrogen is how we create that electrochemical reaction. And again, this has been going on since about 2008 with Bloom. Fuel cells were patented over 150 years ago. I hear a lot. This is new technology. It's not new at all. It's a very well understood process. What Bloom has perfected is the manufacture of these fuel cells, 100% in the US, by the way, the manufacture of these fuel cells at scale using no precious metals, no rare earth metals. So minimal to no supply chain risk is the bottom line. That's really our value. You know, like I said, fuel cells have been around a very, very long time. We just produce them more efficiently.
When you put a plant together to support, and I genuinely don't know the answer to this, hundreds of megawatts, or, you know, is there a sweet spot of a campus size? Is there a sweet spot to a data center size? I presume it's, you know, you can incrementally commission and connect. I don't know how this works, but is there a footprint that you have in mind that if you get to the edge of it, you either have to build a new grid or do something else because it just gets too dense? Or, for example, I look at generator farms now, and as we're evaluating the fueling infrastructure for those, we're looking at the refueling infrastructure for those, we're looking at all the things that go with that. There's a lot of complexity now if you're supporting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of megawatts. So everybody's thinking about it and trying to work on it. And what's the critical mass? I don't know that we've hit it yet, but we're thinking about it. What does that look like? And I'm not trying to compare your product to Gen, but traditional methods of deploying things and where we want to grow come under scrutiny, come under design consideration. So when you think about deploying fuel cells to do this, as opposed to some other technology, is there a sweet spot in size, or is it that's the wrong question to ask?
No, it's a question we get quite often. Each of those boxes you see in my background behind me, each of those fuel cells is putting out 65 kilowatts.
Okay.
Those electrons are simply aggregated on a common busway, you know, within the skid, or they could be deployed separately. But the important point here is we're talking about 65 kilowatt Lego blocks that can go on infinitum. Depends on how much land you have. Now, that also means that your blast radius in the event of a failure is typically 65 kilowatts, right? If we have a 50 megawatt data center and I lose 65 kilowatts, it's like losing one battery in your entire UPS infrastructure.
Right.
You're not down. It's all concurrently maintainable. When we take one down for maintenance, we ramp the other ones up. So those 325 kilowatt skids, so 6 at 65,
right,
They're simply aggregated together, typically in 3.2 meg blocks from a design perspective. And we aggregate through the same medium voltage and switchgear you use today in the
Mm,
data center. There's nothing exotic about our electrons
mm,
again. So I have 65 kilowatt building blocks. I have 325 kilowatt skids. I aggregate those electrons into the building. Once I'm in the building, it's the exact same infrastructure you have today: ATS, UPS,
right,
PDUs, distribution. There's no
right,
difference.
right. And they can't tell what an electron. It's an electron. Just all it
It's an
all looks.
electron.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's no different.
One of the things that comes up from time to time is a conversation about oscillating workloads.
Mhm.
For those of us that are not familiar, we know what oscillating means. But for the audience and myself that doesn't know, when this comes up, because I will hear people that are smart in your space talk about, well, how do you handle this? Well, how do you do that? I don't even know what they're talking about. Like, I
Mhm.
don't know if a point's being made, if it's not being made or whatever. What is an oscillating workload and why is that important to the conversation?
Yeah, great question. Well, because they're becoming more important now, right? In the past, we talked about VMware earlier. We talked there are other tools to level out your load profile. So what's going on inside the building? It was always advantageous to have a very steady load, for your customers, whether those are internal enterprise or your managed service provider. You were operating at some percentage of maximum, and you want it to be as flat as you could.
Mm,
Well, with the advent of GPUs and more importantly, the software used with those GPUs for machine learning, the way in which they work can have incredible spikes between, say, 90% down to 10 or 20%. And those spikes can occur often. They're oscillating up and down.
mm.
That's problematic for a lot of UPS systems. It's problematic for a lot of utilities. I get this question a lot because folks assume that fuel cells can't handle that. Completely false. For a decade now, any blue microgrid, which means we can operate independent of the utility,
Mhm.
whether or not it's there. Any blue microgrid has deployed ultracapacitors, and we can deploy supercapacitors. So energy storage, it's very fast discharge, very fast recharge in between the facility and the fuel cell. What that does is we can instantaneously respond to spikes and drops because I have this buffer of super caps and ultra caps that's responding instantly to that request. The fuel cells can then naturally oscillate up and down as needed, but the brunt of that force is being taken by the capacitance, by the energy storage.
Mm,
So we actually respond better than any traditional utility to GPU type workloads
mm,
because we have a tremendous amount of experience with microgrids using energy storage. Not that I'm a battery, not that I'm
mm.
a UPS, but I can deploy very fast discharge and recharge devices between the building and myself that satisfy those loads perfectly.
Mm.
So a lot of testing going on right now with us. There's some testing I could share with folks at the trade shows, things like that, that prove that point.
Is that one of the? I guess my question is, if traditional um, sources, struggle with that as well, why is it even brought up as a as a part of the conversation? If I mean, for sure, oscillating workloads is brought up because we're trying to think about it in particular as it relates to AI training and other some other things. By the way, traditional data center, whatever the energy source, our grid does not like oscillating workloads. It
That's
hates
right.
oscillating workloads. By the,
That's right.
it hates
Yep.
oscillating energy sources. It hates oscillating workloads. It likes nice steady
Yep.
stream. And our rivers don't like oscillating ebbs and flows. And so why would they even bring it up? Are they presuming that they have a better solution, or is it they're just trying to point out like what? What would be the reason?
It's I think it's the extremity now of these machine learning GPU workloads, and I want to define it only as GPU.
Okay.
It's the frequency at which it's occurring in the span of seconds, sometimes minutes.
Right.
The tremendous ups and downs, and as we connect more of these GPU clusters together, as they're rising and falling at the same time, it's stressing the infrastructure. It's stressing all of the electrical infrastructure. So I would say that the tendency to do that has reached critical mass. It's getting to the point where things are beginning to break.
Mm.
Right. So, you know, I think in the future, David, we'll see. You mentioned oscillating. We don't like that anyway. As you know, we deploy a lot of equipment between the substation and the rack
Right.
to level that out, to take care of the noise with AC delivery. Right. Why not go all DC to the rack?
Right.
Just, Bloom is natively a DC source.
Right.
We invert to AC at our skid, but why not just have an all DC data center? I mean, that's in the future. Yeah. Much more efficient, line loss, and a lot of equipment that can be completely eliminated from today's architecture. Yeah. We're not quite there yet, but more and more conversations are happening from tenants on that.
Oh, it's part of every design conversation there is. I think with everybody, that's not a. Yes. It seems an incredible conversation for those of us that have been around this for a long time now. I mean, there's design that has to be done. There's safety, but if we're talking about some of the power that we're talking about to get out onto the floor, just the amount of copper to do that with AC and some of these other, like, it's just, you got to rethink it. You got to rethink how you're going to do it. And it's a really cool time. Just as we sort of started off our conversation, when you laid out your path, these disruptive times, we had to rethink when we did deck machines, how they communicate to the other infrastructure. We had to rethink when we built the EMC and those interoperable environments you talked about. We had to rethink how they do that, just like we're doing now, not just with the GPUs, but their InfiniBand infrastructure, how they're communicating within their little local networks, and then the buildings themselves, right? This is all, it's all part of the design. It seems easy. Let's just push the easy button.
And then everyone seems to forget that these machines, the GPUs, or we're talking Intel pizza boxes or whoever, they go right back to DC at the board.
Right.
So we drop these AC distributions off the tap can into the plug, all AC, then we go right back to DC in the box. And that creates a tremendous amount of heat. Right. Coming back to DC for the server. So I think it makes sense for the future. I think, you look at 10% line losses between the substation and getting to the rack with all the things we do to account for AC. I think that's probably where we're headed for these types of workloads. Yep.
We're certainly investigating it, and it'll be really cool to see. Well, I've captured a lot of your time. Before we wrap up, well, one of the things I suppose I want to I try to ask everybody, what do you think like the big or the most important next steps are going to be in not for Bloom specifically, but in your industry space as you support infrastructure like ours? What do you think the things that we data center operators, but just people in general, should be paying attention to? And what do you think the next steps are that the industry should be thinking about?
Yeah, great question. I mean, what to look for? If we look at this like a market, there are market movers, like call it the big five hyperscalers and the utilities. Look to what they're doing. They spend, if we look at AWS, there's approximately 15,000 people on their data center team, I believe. There's something around there. There's a lot of very, very smart people that have the resources to investigate multiple technologies, multiple angles, including SMRs and including Bloom and including renewables. So look to the decisions they start to make, I would say, in the next 12 months, because I think that's the way the market will go. The bellwethers of the industry, if you will, the early adopters, because they have some very good insights and some good solutions to this problem, or proposed solutions to this problem. I think also we need to get through the 7 stages of grief, I will call it, and admit that, look, between transmission and generation and demand, that confluence we talked about earlier, we need to start taking steps to solve that, right? We've been talking about this power problem for a couple of years now because it's on the horizon, right? Your iPhone is still working today. Those SAP transactions are still occurring today in the stock market, but the future demand, even if you cut the forecast in half. It cannot be met by traditional methods.
Yeah.
Cannot be done. We don't want to lose our edge in the U.S. and lots of countries don't want to lose their edge and have these facilities go bye-bye.
Right.
Right.
Jeff, what haven't we tapped into that we should have? We've been chatting for a bit. What did I miss?
Yeah. I mean, the only, I guess I would say, closing comments would be we should pay a little bit of attention to economic factors and the normal mom and pop ratepayer, right? And what's going on in that sector. If you look at the news recently with AWS and Talon getting their interconnection rejected because of concerns about the impact to residents. Can you describe
what an interconnection is? For people who don't know, what does that mean?
Yeah, basically interconnecting to the grid. So you would have a large data center next to a nuclear facility, for instance, but that nuclear facility is also serving the community or other businesses. And, there's a concern that the behemoth could take all the power and not be paying their fair share, right? That's really what it comes down to. If you look at in PJM, you look at the recent BRA auction, I think it was 9.8x higher than 2 years ago. That translates to ratepayers paying more for this infrastructure. If you look to AEP's proposal in Ohio to have a data center provider pay, I believe it's 85% of what they request, right? As you know, data centers will typically not use 85% of what they request. Right. These are all indicators to me that the data center should be looking at on-site generation themselves in order to satisfy the community, right? So they don't want a very large campus or data center coming in requesting hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure and then spreading that cost amongst the residents or the other businesses. The data center proposed needs to pay their fair share. If they're asking for it, they should pay for it. This is a growing trend as I see it. And it's a trend where you begin to think about on-site of any sort, whether it's SMRs or Bloom or renewables. There's no new transmission needed. There's no substations required. You're taking control of your own power. And I think that will go a very long way in the community, right? Because the reality is today we share this infrastructure cost. Not completely, but we do share it amongst all the other businesses and all the residents. And we're seeing a trend towards much higher utility rates, which will result, I think, in data centers being targeted, right? If you look at regions like Ireland, they're targeted. We have a perception problem. So we should kind of take steps to rectify that. So this stuff costs a lot of money. That's a better way to say it. Infrastructure.
It does. It's if we're not better at early engagement, accurately forecasting, we don't want to strand capital. They don't want to strand utility. If we can't find a way to do it, then what happens is usually in fear, the supplier, whoever that will be, or whoever that is, will put up a barrier. And it's sometimes the consequence of that is, well, then a data center will go to a friendlier or easier or whatever spot. Maybe not. Maybe they continue to work through and they just incrementally commission. But then they pick up that economic opportunity, they take it someplace else. And so then the community misses that on that economic opportunity. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, to your point, we have to get better. I do think that the organizations like ours, they get better at engaging in this conversation early and often, are going to be the most successful in the next 5 to 10 years. And those that don't get sophisticated and elegant at this are just not. But we also have to then deliver on our promise. Like, you've got to deliver on, we're committing to that. You've got to deliver on it, or they're not. They also talk about clawback. There are a variety of mechanisms that they're talking about. And I don't blame them for having the conversation.
That's exactly right. I think it's exactly what they're trying to protect against, where they deploy hundreds of millions of dollars of infrastructure meant to last, well over 50 years. And the data center pulls out at the end of the lease.
Right.
pull out of the area, right? So they've not fully capitalized that investment.
Right.
And you're right. The barriers, I think barriers is a good word, and I think those foundations are being laid right now to put those barriers up.
Right.
Right. So let's proactively address this thing and look at other ways to generate power that doesn't tax the entire system so much. Right.
Yeah. We have opportunities ahead of us. It's disruptive times, Jeff. It's just disruptive times.
Yes, it is.
Hey, man, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it. We're going to have links to you and a Bloom down in the show notes. And before we take off, anything you want to leave with anybody?
No, David, this has been great. Thank you. I've been wanting to come on your show. I feel like a celebrity now. Been wanting to come on for a very long time. No, you please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Please check out our website, and yeah, we'll get through this thing. I think there's a lot of opportunity, like you said, to really make the whole world a little bit better with more power, less pollution. It checks a lot of boxes.
One of the things that I really enjoy about you, Jeff, is why I wanted you to come on the program. Whether people agree or disagree, we want them to get engage with you. They can engage with you through LinkedIn. You're always willing to engage. If they disagree, but they better bring facts. But it's it's a great, robust discussion, and I'm glad you came on today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it.
My great pleasure. Hey, if you liked that conversation, click the like button, and if you loved it, subscribe. We'll see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.